The children of day and night have always respected and despised each other. Their battles that began in the age of myths were transferred to humans, and they still continue in our time. They show us the bank building where the explosions take place, and someone says even the ugly villains living in hell dream of heaven. It was a man posing as a clown, and soon he announces to all the police officers surrounding him that they will receive a terrible and exciting greeting in heaven because Ralph's show is starting. He himself was standing on a large ball that was in the air, and it suddenly began to fall on people. The officer gives the order to all police officers to retreat, and then Ralph strikes the ball on the ground, resulting in a large-scale explosion, and the skill was called Death Ball. After that, only a clown could stand on his feet, and he declares that he likes this view and this wonderful show. It was an A-rank villain named Ralph the Clown. His class was a summoner, and his skill was chaos. Suddenly, one of the policemen raises a gun at the clown, trying to aim at him, and then Ralph goes berserk. He creates some kind of strange thing with strong energy in his hand and says that despite the situation there will always be some kids who haven't figured out what's what yet, after which he wishes him a good road and uses his skill called pin shot. After that, he laughed and there was an explosion behind his back, which brought him great pleasure. At this moment, inside the bank, his henchmen are robbing the bank. They are shouting for money to be brought to them and whether they want a hole in the head. They wanted to rob another bank. Immediately after that, the school bus arrives and Ralph the Clown gives the command to his people that it's time for them to go home and orders them to pack backpacks. His people heard this and immediately ran in the direction of the bus. One of the clown's people gave him a bag and he grabbed a couple of bills from there and started sniffing. As a result, he was pleased with the sweet smell of money. He uses them to fill Ralph land with fear and horror. While the clown was enjoying the money, two of his other people got on the bus with a woman and a child. One of them knocks on the door and orders it to be opened immediately, after which they open it, and a man in a black mask was sitting at the wheel. The bandit asked why the door was blocked and then the driver replied, "It's not a sports car but a school bus, the doors are slowly opening here." Then he noticed a woman and decides to ask what kind of woman is behind him, to which the bandit replies that she is a hostage. Then the driver also notices the child and also asks about her. They explain to him that this is the princess daughter of the governor. And to be precise, this is a mother and daughter and they will be given an excellent ransom. The driver did not answer anything and just watched as they were brought into the bus. Suddenly the woman breaks out and asks the criminals to let her daughter go. But the bandits did not listen and, grabbing her by the hand, ordered her to be silent. Soon they took her away from her daughter, who was hysterical and called her mother, and the mother herself tried to escape to her. The thug who was holding the little girl told her to be quiet and reminded her if she did not obey her uncle, he would do something bad. Suddenly, someone turns to him calling him a jerk. It was the driver who ordered them to release the hostages, but the guys understood and just watched. Realizing that talking won't help here, the driver grabs one guy by the face and he starts screaming in pain. In the end, the man again asks to release the hostages. Meanwhile, another bandit throws the woman away and decides to attack without fully understanding what is happening now, but the driver instantly reacts to this. There are people with special abilities in this world. They awaken them and commit crimes under the control of their own desires, and those who have the blood of the child of the night are called villains. As an example of this, we are shown the clown Ralph, who ordered his people to come back and celebrate to the fullest, and they will triple the barbecue. Everyone supported Ralph and followed him straight to the bus, and as soon as he touches the bus, someone immediately throws one of his people out the window. At this moment, we are shown that there are still people with superpowers who are fighting against villains. In parallel, the driver gets off the bus after the second bandit. Then he throws the body in front of the clown, and the clown angrily asks who this madman is. After hearing the answer, Ralph began to get angry, because he just came to take out the trash and that's all. Those who stand on the side of society and receive support, those who have the blood of a child of the day, are called psychers. Who our hero was pretending to be a driver, but in fact he was an S-rank psycher named Cashin Lee. His class was a striker, and his skill was fire. Soon our hero greets Ralph the Clown, remembering that they have not seen each other for a whole year, and he is very glad to see him after such a long separation. The clown is shocked to see Cashin and does not understand what this man is doing here and where did he come from. Meanwhile, someone in Cashin's headphones says how he does not understand what the guy is doing and this is no longer according to plan. Why he climbed there alone was also not understood, but our hero takes and simply destroys the earphone by holding it in his hand. After that, he announces that no one will bother them now and suggests starting the fun, at which point the whole clown gang and himself were very puzzled and generally scared. Then the guy tells them he won't even be able to sort them, because there will be nothing left of scum like them. At this moment, he gathers fire in his palm and is going to deal with everyone quickly and without hassle. After a while, we are taken to the streets of a big city. The news reports that there was a robbery on South 5th Avenue yesterday afternoon, was criticized for using excessive force. The Human Rights Commission officially asked Lampas to participate, saying that the first-class psyker Cashin, who used ruthless violence, needs appropriate punishment. Why are they moving to Lampas's Washington office? Lampas is an international organization of psychers. There was a woman with pink hair and drinking tea in the office. It was an S-rank psycher Tuffen Schiller. Her class was enlightened. Her skill was light. She asked our hero if he was a villain by any chance? Cashin, on the other hand, squeezed a paper cup explaining to her what she herself knows. He would not contact them. However, she asks him, has he ever thought about the consequences? Because of his disobedience, he missed Ralph and turned the public against the organization. But the guy tells her that he had hostages. She does not let him finish and replies that then he should have been even more careful. The safety of the hostages is their top priority, but the guy thought he could save them, which he told Ms. Schiller. However, she answers him that he needs to act like a psyker, in other words, to act rationally and calmly, then adds in a raised tone that you can't do the hell out of your head. Let him just see what they got in the end. Are his actions different from the actions of the villains? He then tells him that he is on probation, and she hopes that he understands what this means and what will happen if he screws up. Already walking down the hall, he gets mad at her and calls her a witch, after which he wonders how Jeff even managed to make friends with her. Just as he decides to put his thoughts in order, his phone rang, and it was a call from Jeff. The guy picks up the phone and asks Jeff what he wanted. And then Jeff asks him to come right now, and the guy asks where exactly he should go, after which Rhodes hears in response. This is very surprising to our hero, since this is in Greece, and he was in America. After a while, we are shown Rhodes Airport, and then the city itself. Cashin decides to have tea at one of the local cafes and remembers that thanks to Jeff, he has a lot of good memories. After that, he wonders when was the last time they saw each other. He further assumes that it was 6 months ago, after which he became a little depressed, remembering all this, and at the same time recalls the orphanage at the National Assembly. Inside, in one of the classrooms, we were shown a toy that moved, and the children were delighted with this sight. They looked attentively and rejoiced, as if they had seen magic. Our hero was very young then and asked if the toy was alive? But young Jeff replied that, of course not. It was just a toy that moved thanks to his strength. And all the children admired this power, after which Jeff asked the guys if the toy really looked like it was alive. And then our young hero asks Jeff if he will become a psyker, and if he will kill villains, and it will even be shown on TV? Jeff doesn't even know, because he thinks he has a pretty useless power. But our young hero thinks the opposite and tells his older friend that she's just amazing. Then Cashin remembers that all this was before he was adopted in the USA. Then there really was a time when he did not know any fears. It was a good time for him. Sometime later on the same day, but in the evening, our hero was standing near a cafe that had been closed for a long time. He looks at the time on the phone and notices that Jeff is already late, and besides, he is not picking up the phone, which makes him nervous. Jeff suddenly appears behind Cashin, but he didn't look well. Then the guy turns to him and sees that Jeff is terribly injured and covered in blood. He runs up to him and asks what's wrong with him. Did the villain hurt him? It's hard for Jeff to talk, but he still tries to say that he shouldn't have called this guy. Cashin doesn't understand what he means. Jeff then asks for a strange locket without explanation, but the guy asks him to explain everything first. Our hero wants to know what happened to him, but there is no time to explain, and Jeff simply replies that he is fine. But suddenly after that, he spits out blood, and the guy is shocked by everything that is happening. Jeff realizes something and immediately asks Cashin to run away, taking the medallion, and if he does not do this, he will also be in danger. But our hero does not listen and does not understand what he is carrying. Then he decides to call an ambulance, and at that moment a strange man in a mask and with a katana in his hands appears. Jeff was very shocked, and Cashin didn't understand who he was at all. Unexpectedly, Jeff pushes our hero, and the masked man immediately reacts to this, as a result of which the unknown blows off the head of our hero's friend. The guy saw all this and was shocked. Suddenly the whole world froze and turned gray, after which he looks at the severed head of his close friend, while the killer tries to escape. But Cashin notices this and is overcome with anger, after which he breaks down and runs after the killer. After a while, near the lighthouse, he catches up with the masked man. Catching his breath after the chase, Cashin asks if this is some kind of revenge or someone hired him? But the guy doesn't need any arguments, since he's going to die by his hand right now anyway, and the fire is starting to gather in his hand. The criminal answers him that the guy is still sharp-tongued, and addresses our hero by name. This surprises the guy very much, because the killer turned out to be Jack, a man with a katana and a patch over one eye. He was an S-rank psyker named Jack Khalid, his class was Knight, and his skill was Strength. Our hero couldn't formulate a single thought out of anger, and was just shaking with hatred. However, Jack was calm and replied to the young psyker that he had only eliminated the traitor of the organization, but the guy did not believe in this nonsense. Suddenly, a woman's voice is heard behind Cashin, who says that this is true and Jeff killed their colleague. There were witnesses and evidence. Lampas confirmed everything and gave permission. It was an S-rank psyker girl named Layla. Her class was enlightened, and her skill was cold. Jack tells Cashin that he doesn't want to be considered a traitor either, so he demands to tell everything that Jeff managed to tell him. After that, they stood and waited for our hero's answer. Exhaling, he answers them that in all the 10 years that Jeff was a psyker, he did not kill a single person, and they say that he would do this to his colleague? Lila warns that there are 2 other top-notch psychers nearby, so let her think with her own head, and not be stupid. Jack adds if he is a real psyker, let him be reasonable and give one last warning. Unexpectedly for Jack, our hero agrees and says that they are right. Since he is a psyker, then he must act like a psyker, that is, rationally and calmly. At this moment Layla and Jack were surprised, since the guy decided to kill them and ran straight at Jack. The man pulls out a katana and strikes, but the guy dodges him and strikes with his fiery fist from below. Jack manages to block it, and not without difficulty. As a result, the knight flies away and gathers energy into a katana for a new blow. He is going to use the soul of the sword. Meanwhile, behind Cashin, the girl is also gathering her strength and is going to use the blast of cold. But the guy doesn't care. He completely succumbs to anger and shouts at them to start already, as a result of which they both land their punches. But Cashin calmly blocks them. Then he immediately intends to strike back, but a piece of ice flies at him like a bullet, and our hero falls to his knees. He realizes that Layla is also a sniper. Then the girl tells him to surrender. If he does not obey, they will have to eliminate him as well. But the guy is stubborn and does not listen. He collects fire in his hand and immediately throws it at 2 psychers. It was the hellfire that provoked the big explosion. While Cashin was not in sight, he decides to run away, this time thinking that they will see each other again, and then he jumps into the water. But suddenly another shard flies straight into his chest, which he did not even notice, after which he begins to fall. He fell into the water and, already sinking into the depths, thinks that he cannot die so easily. He needs to avenge Jeff. At this moment, the locket that Jeff gave him before his death begins to glow, as a result of which we are transported to the toilet. The teenagers could be heard arguing in the toilet. They claimed that someone was no longer breathing, and could not believe that he had died, after which they ran away. Then some boy lying with his head in the toilet began to move and suddenly got out of the toilet, after which he began to put his breathing in order. Then Cashin tries to figure out where he is, because then he fell off a cliff and what happened to his voice. Directing his gaze at the mirror in the toilet, he was surprised. He touched his face with trembling hands and could not understand who it was and what was going on here at all. It's not him, and in general it's impossible. Why does he look like a teenager and has the body of a teenager too? He decides to wash his face and thinks it's a dream, just a dream. After washing his face and changing his hairstyle a little, he looks in the mirror and thinks that he knows that this is not the case. He did not understand how it happened and why then the memory of the former owner of the body flows into his head. Now he was Kwon Kong and he was in Korea, after which he wondered how it happened, and what kind of memories are these? Suddenly, someone spoke to Cashin, noticing that he had woken up. Then our hero got scared without realizing who was talking to him, and then dark energy, which was a spirit, came out of the medallion. The spirit introduced himself by the name of Moros. He is a very ancient noble spirit. This shocked Cashin and he did not understand what appeared in front of him, calling him, "What is it?" and why he got out of the necklace. But the spirit replies that he is not, what, but a Moros. And then he continues that besides our hero has a lot of questions, which means he wants to find answers. After which it turns out that it was Moros who brought Cashin back to life. After he died, Moros said this several times in a row. And then the spirit notices that our hero quickly mastered Korean, to which the guy replies, he lived in Korea before he was adopted in the United States. This upset Cashin. He could hardly believe that he had died and then resurrected in a new body, and considers it complete nonsense. Then the spirit explains that Jeff gave the necklace away and he did it to protect it, which surprised our hero. He was thinking about what Moros had said, and was what Jeff had said then true? Then he exhales and decides to ask the spirit, did he say that Jeff was looking for something? Namely, some kind of iron wooden sword, after which the spirit clarifies that it is a sword of destruction. This sword was created back in the era of myths. Then Cashin asks how Moros knows that the sword was made so long ago. Then Moros answers, it's because he's an ancient spirit, but the guy thinks it's nonsense. Then Moros answers him, if he doesn't know something, let him slam his mitt and listen. This made the young guy a little mad, who then picked up the phone and asked Moros why he should believe him, and why would he do that. Then the spirit responds, he's actually a victim here, since he had to use half of his power to revive the young guy. Then the guy thinks that the fact that he considers himself a victim is very funny while flipping through the phone. Unexpectedly, he finds something very shocking, namely the news about Cashin. It says that Lampas officially announced the successful completion of the operation to eliminate the famous psyker Lee Cashin, who was convicted of participating in black traffic and money laundering. Meanwhile, first-class psyker Jeff Malik was killed by Cashin during his detention. Many people around the world mourn his death. This angered our hero, who did not understand what kind of nonsense it was, and why did he kill Jeff. His hands started shaking because he couldn't believe it. He would never have touched Jeff. Such news begins to make our hero very angry because Lampas decides to blame the guy for all the crimes, and it makes him more and more angry. As a result, a strange energy begins to come out of Cashin, as he did everything possible to protect people, and Lampas blamed him for all the troubles. Moros asks the guy to calm down, because he is now starting to turn into something else, after which our hero himself begins to feel something. His eyes change, one turned blue, and the second remained yellow. Then a certain pain begins from waking up and Cashin wonders what it is. He looks at his hands and sees how they have changed. They have become black and with claws, as if he was wearing some kind of gloves. After that, we see how he changed completely and some energy was still coming out of him, which shocked our hero and he did not understand what was happening to him. Meanwhile, we are transferred to another place where a group of school hooligans are waiting for someone. One of them is very nervous, but another calms him down saying that the one they are waiting for will be soon. Just after that, the boy in whose body they were waiting came running. The bully with purple hair, who was in charge, tells everyone to look at this boar, while the second with blonde hair considers him a freak. Next, the main one asks if the guy checked what they asked for. He responds positively. He was in that toilet and there was no one there. Then the third bully with glasses on his face asks if the one who checked is sure of this. He answers positively again. Then they ask about the police or ambulance at the scene, but none of them were there. Then the guy with blonde hair became enraged and started shouting at the bespectacled man that he said how Kwon Kanu did not breathe and died. Then the bespectacled man remembers how at that moment he checked and saw that Kwon did not ask the bespectacled man questions, which place he checked Kwon Kanu, and how can he be trusted after that. Then the chief tells him to stop hitting, and it doesn't matter if Kwon is there or not, there is no difference. Then the bespectacled man and the light one ask the main thing, what should they do next? He drank juice from the bag that the fat man brought, and after licking his lips smiled maliciously, answering them that they would find him and finish him off. Some time later, we are returned to Cashin, who is on the roof of the school, and the spirit tells him that all the students go to the roof to be alone. This is an excellent solution. But the guy sent him because he climbed to the roof on the outside of the building, and not through the stairs, and asks why he suddenly became a villain? Then Moros exhales heavily and thinks that he already regrets his choice. Then he begins to explain that the fate of our hero has changed. Since he managed to die and be reborn again, but the owner of his body was destined to awaken as a villain. His new body has the ability to have huge catastrophic consequences. Abruptly Cashin interrupts the spirit, and is shocked by what he says, asks, catastrophic consequences, did he really take over his fate after being reborn? Moros confirms this, and then our hero begins to laugh at such a fate and says, a high-class psyker has been reborn into a villain and his capabilities have become the capabilities of Cashin. After that, he hits the wall next to him, because it pisses him off and the guy gets furious. He shouts at the spirit, why did he reborn him, for what is all this? Moros tries to calm our hero down, but he doesn't want to hear anything. Moros insists and tells the guy, because he knows himself that the villains are controlled by their desires and right now they are taking over our hero. The evil itself is inside him and the guy is shocked by this news. But now Moros helps him contain this evil. However, the more angry he gets, the stronger the evil inside him. And as soon as he wanted to explain what would happen when evil took possession of him, the guy abruptly stops him and asks him not to talk. After that, he was very saddened by all this and wondered what he should do now. After a couple of seconds of silence, Moros gives him the answer, he must survive. Jeff would have told him that too, but the guy asks what he might know about Jeff. Then the spirit answers him how they talked about Cashin. Jeff is very sorry that he had to involve the guy in this case, and although he felt death approaching, he did not plan to escape. He only wanted our hero to have a chance to survive, as this was his last wish. From this, the guy calmed down, and the spirit tells him that he needs to learn to control himself. But the guy sent him saying that he got tired of giving advice, as it is very annoying. Next, Moros asked the guy if he wanted to regain his human form. After our hero agreed and regained his human form, he turned to the spirit saying, "Here," to him. But Moros corrected him saying, "Do not hear, but the noble ancient spirit of Moros." But Cashin ignored this and asks what he is. What does this ancient noble spirit of his mean? Moros does not believe that the guy is interested in knowing this, but he says that he is interested. He begins to assume, since he knows how to revive people, there may be something else. But the spirit interrupts him, answering that he will find out about it when he finds the sword. The guy calls the sword a piece of metal, and since the conversation turned to this, he decides to ask, does this sword have anything to do with Jeff's murder? Moroi replies how sure he is of this, and immediately at that moment someone called our hero. It was 3 hooligans who found out whether he was dead or not earlier. Then approaching him, the main one starts laughing at him, saying how glad he is to see that the guy is alive. Meanwhile, inside the school in the hallway, all the girls stared at someone and strongly discussed one handsome man. They were delighted with his body. It would be a trainee psyker named Kim Yukin of unknown rank. His class was a striker, and his skill was fire. He was tall with red hair and had a cross earring on his left ear. Suddenly, a man named Lee Dung dials him and the guy answers him asking if something has happened. Then he was talking about some kind of problem while all the girls were watching him. but abruptly he notices something and looks out the window just above the floor where he was. Then he says that he will call back a little later and hangs up the phone, going somewhere in parallel, and meanwhile, in front of the corridor where our hero was on the roof, our hero met with hooligans. They stood and looked at each other, after which our hero remembered them from Kwon Kanu's memories and realized that it was definitely them. Then he turned his attention to the spirit, but Moros calmed him down, saying that only Cashin could see him. Then the hooligans began to say how worried they were about him. Suddenly they would go to jail because of his weak body. Their main one tells Kwon Kan that he pisses him off if he's not dead, so why didn't he come to them right away, walks on the roof here, hides. Unexpectedly for the hooligans, our hero asks rudely, what kind of jerks are they? Then he adds that he is not in the mood at all right now. He does not like to beat children, but apparently it is necessary for educational purposes and simultaneously needs his fists. Moros warns our hero, villains even without transformation have a huge power, which is several times greater than any human. If he loses control of himself, it will be dangerous. But Cashin knows all this. At this moment one of the hooligans comes up and runs over the guy, asking what he just told them. Next, he assumes that the guy completely moved his head, but our hero looked at him like garbage, as a result of which this enraged the light bully and decides to hit the guy in parallel, asking what he was staring at. As a result, without having time to hit our hero himself and gets punched in the face, the other hooligans were shocked by this, since a completely different guy was standing in front of them. He was calm and stood in a fighting stance waiting for the next one, and the first one fell right in front of him, as one blow from our hero knocked him out. The main one was shocked and did not understand where this kid got so much power from. The bespectacled man took off and attacked Cashin, shouting that he was finished for what he had done. But the guy remains calm and keeps his cool, as a result of which the bespectacled man strikes with a bat, but our hero blocks it with his left hand. Immediately after that the guy hits him with his right hand. The bespectacled man immediately loses consciousness, and this plunges the head into even greater shock. He could not believe how our hero put two of them down in one fell swoop. Then Cashin turned his attention to the last bully and asks how their conscience does not gnaw at their actions at all. But the bully does not know what to answer because of the shock, and Cashin asks him why he is silent. But the leader begins to smile sharply and replies that he does not know such a thing as conscience, and he spat on everyone and on their conscience, and they ask if our hero thinks that he cannot cope with him? But the guy, after hearing all this, decides that he does not have a conscience, and since he does not have one, he needs it to appear, and his fist will perfectly help him in this. Next, our hero ran to attack the last bully, and he stood in a stance waiting for him. As soon as he approached, the bully strikes with his right hand, but the guy passes under it and strikes from below on the chin. Immediately after him, he hits in the stomach. From such blows, the bully fell to his knees, and Cashin asks if he has a conscience? But though with difficulty, he still insulted him in response, and then our hero grabs him by the shirt, concluding, apparently, the blow was not strong enough. And then he decides to hit him again, looking at him with a frightening look that alarmed the bully terribly. Suddenly someone turns to them from the outside, asking, "What are they doing?" They looked in the direction from where it was said, and there stood Kim Yukin. This greatly shocked the bully, and our hero lets him go, asking who Kim is and why he gets into their business. Kim asks, will he really beat someone who is weaker than him at times? The bully reacted to this, did not understand. Did talking about a weakling mean him? This enrages him and he stabs him in the back, but our hero reacts and kicks the bully in the stomach from a U-turn, and he flies away. At this moment, Kim grabs Cashin by the shoulder and asks him to stop, but our hero reacts and hits him with an elbow from a U-turn, which surprised the intern. He manages to block the blow with his elbow with his hands, then Cashin strikes a second blow with his hand, but he abruptly moves away, which surprises the guy. As soon as he moves away to the right distance and hits the head with his right foot, but Cashin crouches down and thinks that the guy is very fast. At this moment, Moros turns to our hero and says his opponent is a psyker. If he loses, then everything will come to an end. Cashin was distracted by this, and at that moment Kim strikes, but the guy dodges him, although a cut appeared on his face. Then they both stood in a stand and looked away from each other. Cashin thought, is this kid really a psyker? Abruptly, Kim stops and says that it's enough. If they continue, then it will only get worse for the two of them. Our hero did not understand this. Next, Kim gives him a band-aid and tells him how he got hurt. After that, they looked at each other and Cashin takes the band-aid, then turns around and leaves. Kim looks after him and thinks, he killed 3 of them alone. Does they really have such a strong student at school? Therefore, he felt something and looked at his arm, which was slightly sore from Cashin's blow. Some time later, at the computer club, our hero tried to log into Lampa's account, but nothing worked, as they blocked his account. He guessed it, of course, but things are really terrible. After that, Cashin turns to Moros on the street and asks how he knew that the guy was a psyker. Then the spirit responds he identified it by the waves when he touched it, and then Cashin considers it an interesting ability, but the spirit considers it nothing. If he had considered its color scheme, he would have learned more information, but our hero does not understand how the spirit knows such complex words, to which he responds he is, in fact, an ancient noble spirit who lives and gains knowledge from generations. Next, he suggests that our hero turn into the form of a villain, since it would be better to find out about his capabilities in advance. But the guy doesn't say anything and just froze. Then the spirit thinks that he doesn't really want to eat like that, but he will have to. He needs to understand what the essence of the villain's power is and is further interested in what he needs to do this. Moros explains that the villains come from an inability to control the 5 desires and 7 senses, but the guy thinks he's talking nonsense. The spirit continues and says that in the case of Cashin's, the trigger button is anger, and then the guy thought about it. As a result, he remembers all the events up to this point and begins to get angry, after which he began to scream and promise how he would destroy the entire Lampas. This surprised Moros and he asked what Cashin was doing. The kid replied to this as he shows anger, but the spirit tells him that it is not necessary to yell, you just need to feel the anger itself and that's it. It made our hero very angry, who asked if it was impossible to say it right away. After a while, we were taken to the highway where a blue car was driving and they were talking about villains named Blaster. The maniac, who likes to play with explosives, is said to have been able to arrive illegally at Incheon Airport, and has already been seen in the city today. There was a trainee psyker in the car, Kim Yukin, who read the information and the fact that there were already 102 victims of this villain. And there was another psyker at the wheel, who said that he had no special combat abilities, but his ability to create explosives was incredibly infuriating. It was a B-rank psyker named Lee Dun. His class was Knight, and his skill was Strength. He continued to talk about the villain, saying that he is a psychopath to all this. Then Kim answers him that villains only know how to create problems. Sociopaths who do not know how to control their desires need to catch him before he escapes, and you could also see a great contempt for villains in his eyes. Lee believes that he reacts sharply to all the villains, and then the guy replies that the task of the psychers is to bring justice to them. But Lee still insists that he do it, and the guy just let him watch and learn. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, our hero opened a status panel. Moros tells him that this is all the information about him, and then the guy notices that he seems to be in some kind of game. Then he notices the shadow sword and the healing, and then the spirit responds that these are his skills and that's why the wound on his face healed so quickly. Then our hero assumes that even if a limb is amputated, it will recover? Moros replies that it all depends on the range of his mana, but there is nothing written in the mana line and the guy notices it. Then the spirit responds, which means that it has yet to reveal this power in itself. Then our hero notices that he has only 300 mana points, and remembers that when he was a psyker, she had more than 1500 mana points. He remembered how the spirit had told him that he had catastrophic strength, but somehow the guy didn't really think, but the spirit thought he had huge potential. People have a proverb, you can't easily pull a fish out of a pond, so if he doesn't try, he'll never try a fish. Next, Cashin asks, can he use this scanner on other people, too? Moros confirms this by saying that it is possible only 3 times a day, then he wonders if we should try to use more? The spirit answers how he and Jeff tried and he had to sleep off almost the whole day. Then our hero looks at him and thinks for a whole day plotting something. Next, Moros offers to try out the skills of our hero and he asks what he needs to do now. Should he shout out the name or what? Then the spirit explains that he just imagines the shadow sword in his head, and the guy tries to do exactly as he was told. As a result, he gets to use the skill, which surprises him, since something has just appeared from the shadows. Then he finds out that he can even touch it. Even though it's a shadow, he's really very sharp. But Moros was silent all this time and then thought about how he thought it would take a whole day to train. But he did it right away, and did Jeff really know about his capabilities? The guy looked at the sword and said that it was so hard, he could even use it as a shield. But the spirit tells how the villains themselves know how to create protection and weapons for themselves, but the guy knew it himself. Since they are not in a hurry, he is slowly creating a costume for himself from his abilities. Moros decides to reproach him for the style, which was completely absent, and then our hero asks him to shut up. Later, when evening began to fall, the guy was heading somewhere and Moros asked about it, after which he receives a simple answer: our hero was heading home. Moros did not respond to this, and then the guy explains that Kwan Kanu has a family, and even though his parents are not with them, he lives with his sister. Then Moros wonders if Cashin is going to meet her? To which he responds positively, since he may have such a fate in store for him. But it seems to Cashin that he would definitely like to protect his sister. Moros notices, it seems, our hero's conscience tortured him, and then he answers, because the boy actually died because of him. Suddenly, an explosion occurs nearby, which Cashin pays all his attention to and sees a bunch of people running from there. He sees a building that was completely covered in fire. People around were panicking, someone was shouting that it was a bomb and the internet was not working. Then someone said that the villain grabbed the mother and daughter. Then our hero realizes that there are hostages. He immediately goes there without hesitation, to which Moros draws attention and tells him to wait, because this is a villain and he is much stronger than that schoolboy from the roof. He has incredible strength, but the guy replies that they will fight like villains. But Moros explains to him that the battle between villains is an unspoken taboo. He, as a psyker, should know this. Moros does not know what motivates him, a thirst for revenge or a sense of justice. But now he is also a villain. So he suggests not to get into other people's fights. He doesn't want to make them all his enemies, and give up revenge on Lampas. The guy stops abruptly and looks at the building, after which he says, well, so what? Which greatly surprises Moros. Then the spirit tells Cashin that he is no longer a psyker, but our hero thinks otherwise. After all, he has a hostage, a mother with a child, and knowing that someone is in trouble and turning a blind eye to it, people don't do that. After hearing this, Moros recalls a conversation with Jeff, who spoke for Cashin. What a difficult character he has, of course, but he has the biggest heart among everyone he knows. That's why he trusts Cashin, and then Moros remembered how he chose Jeff himself, who chose Cashin and he couldn't do anything about it. Then the spirit offers to transform and will help him, so they decided to rescue the hostages and catch the villain. They show us the shopping center inside the building where everything was destroyed. Everything was smashed and destroyed. In the middle of this, a mother and daughter were sitting near the window to the street. The woman asked not to do this. In parallel, the villain set bombs on the hostages. He calmed them down and asked them to be quiet and not cry, because they are doing such a fun thing, so why should they cry? He also asked them to smile, telling them, just like him, it was a C-rank villain named Blaster. His class was a bomber. His skill was fire. Meanwhile, the psyker car was standing at the gas station and refueling the car. Kim Woo-chang was waiting for the car to refuel and abruptly decided to look at his right hand, and then he remembers our hero and is sure he is not so simple. And then he realizes that he doesn't even know his name, after which his phone immediately starts ringing and the guy answers the call. At this moment, Lee Dung is talking on the phone with a girl and apologizes for not being around because he is on a mission, so he promises to treat her next time. Then he says goodbye to the girl and approaches the intern, who tells him that while Lee was going to the toilet, the blaster appeared and reminds the senior psyker that this is, in fact, a task that greatly puzzled the senior, namely, the task was to catch the blaster. Then they return us to the villain and show fireworks in the night sky. Then the blaster asks the boy, has he ever seen 5-colored fireworks over the pitch-black evening sky? The boy could hardly hold back tears and trembled very much at the same time, answering the villain that he had never seen these fireworks, and then Blaster tells him that he had never seen such a thing either, and how sad he was because of this. Then he touches his face and tells the boy not to be sad, because his mother's insides and blood will fly everywhere like the most beautiful fireworks. Blaster can't stop being happy just thinking about it, and gets a lot of ecstasy from these thoughts, after which he asks if he can start with her hands and then move on to her feet. He wants to leave his head as a souvenir, so finally his chest and neck. Suddenly there is some kind of explosion, and then the blaster starts smiling, saying that they have a guest and welcomes him. Then he says that the guy should not be shy and go out to play. After that, they respond positively, and abruptly the glass breaks behind him, from where our hero jumps out, about to attack the villain. As a result, he does not have time to react to the blow, and the guy hits him right in the face. From the blow, the blaster flies to the other end of the room directly into the wall with incredible force, after which it simply falls unconscious. We are shown Cashin, who was calm and it felt like his eyes were glowing with different colors. Then he asks Moros for the hostages, to which he answers, they both have not been injured yet. Suddenly, Moros screams at our hero for his body, and then Cashin notices a bomb on his body, after which it begins to glow. The guy realizes that he is very close to the hostages and the explosion will hit them and the bombs on their bodies, which will lead to a big explosion, and then he decides to jump away from them as far as possible with all his might. As a result, he does so. Then we are shown a view from the outside where a big explosion is taking place. People on the street are panicking that something has exploded. They do not understand where the police are and where are the psychers at all. They show us a room from which very little remains, and in the middle of it stands a blaster, and says he came to them without knocking and does not know why he is here, but he can definitely say that he is a tactless fool. He would like to make a beautiful firework out of it, and it's a pity that it exploded so quickly, and this sadness can only be embodied by the hostages who eventually survived. Blaster, laughing at all this, collects a new bomb in his hand, but suddenly someone attacks the villain on the arm, as a result of which he cuts it off and the blaster dropped the bomb and the villain's hand fell with it. After that, he began to scream hysterically in pain, and at that moment he was approaching him with incredible speed and grabbing him by the shirt. Then he throws him to the ground with all his might, and as soon as all the dust from the blow has gone, they show us a hard-lying blaster that was gathering strength in his hand, but it was shaking and it didn't work out. But our hero grabs his hand and says, "That's the trick again. Even in games enemies don't fall for the same trick twice," and then Cashin gathers strength in his fist to strike. As a result, he hits the villain in the face with all his might, and then blows were heard. These were the blows of our hero, who broke down and did not control himself. He beat and beat the blaster more and more, repeating to himself, "More." His face looked like a monster, and there was not the slightest hint of a person. Unexpectedly, they tried to call him, but he did not hear and enjoyed the beating. But still Moros managed to get through to Cashin and he stopped. It was as if he woke up from a dream and saw a barely alive villain in front of him, and then Moros tells him that he finally heard him. Our hero begins to come to his senses and cannot believe that he was the one who treated him like that, and looks at his hands, which were shaking and were all covered in blood. Moros tells him that the situation is SOSO, emotions have taken over him, and he has lost his identity. He further explains that if Cashin cannot control himself, he will become a real villain who is controlled by his desires. Then the guy asks him to stop talking, and it made him very sad, because he did not believe that he had become like this. Next, the spirit asks if our hero is okay after the explosion. The guy gets up and trots in parallel, answering that everything is fine, the main thing is to save the hostages. Then he gathered his thoughts and decided to free the hostages, but when he approached them, he and Moros saw how a mother and son were horrified by the sight of our hero. They were afraid of him more than a blaster. Some time later, the police and psychers arrived at the scene of the incident. An ambulance took away Blaster, who was unconscious and in terrible condition. Meanwhile, Psycherly was giving a report on the phone. He confirmed that the hostages have been released and are safe and they need to continue their investigations, but at first glance it seems that this is a fight between two villains. While Kim Woo-chang was examining the torn toy, Lee continued to talk about how witnesses described him, but they have not yet been able to identify his identity. Kim looked at the toy carefully and thought that there was a child among the hostages and could not figure out if there were really two villains. After he heard the police talking, one tells the second if he heard the talk that the hostages were saved by the villain, but the second considers it nonsense, and yes, he also heard something of this kind. But the first to insist that there were witnesses to this, suddenly Kim gets into their conversation, who asked for forgiveness for interfering, but he wonders who they were talking about now. At this moment, Uchkin calls Sikerdun and tells him to go check the cameras in the security room on the first floor, and he will join him soon. The young Siker accepted the order and looked at the toy once more, threw it, and went to the security room. Meanwhile, on the street in the park late at night, our hero is strong on a bench and remembers how a mother and child asked to save them from him and asked him not to kill them. They were terrified and could not stop trembling with fear. Our hero covered his face with his hands and tried to drive away all these thoughts, and then Moros asks why he is so limp. Cashin's answer is, if it wasn't for the spirit, he would have gone crazy too, like that criminal, and this one confirms Moros. He leaned on the back of the bench and looked at the sky, saying that he was really a villain. Suddenly, a message arrives on his phone. He takes it and looks at it. Then the spirit is interested in what is there, to which the guy replies that this is Kanu's sister, and she invites us to dinner together. Moros asks him if he will go home, and he remains silent without answering. As a result, for a couple of seconds after that, his stomach rumbled. Meanwhile, the Sikers were in the security room where Lee Dun couldn't believe his eyes. He wondered who he was. He asked about the villain, namely about our hero, and could not believe in any way what he saw on the screen, and asked if his eyesight was bad or if the villain was really saving hostages. Then he looks at Kim and asks, "Is this some kind of joke?" The young guy looked at it calmly and also did not understand anything, but also thought about something. A little later, we are transferred to the apartment where Kwon Kanu and his sister live. Cashin came home and went into the kitchen. There was food and a note on the table. Our hero takes it and reads it. It was written there, "Warm up the soup with rice and eat. There are also fruits in the refrigerator. You can also take them, and his sister did a good job today, with love from her." Suddenly, he remembers the shelter he was in a previous life where they told him how late he was, and he asked for forgiveness because he was playing and forgot about the time. The woman replied, "For a child who is always late, she has no dinner." But suddenly someone gives bread to young Cashin, and it was Jeff, who asked not to tell that woman and eat quietly. Then he was eating bread from Jeff with a happy face, and this note made our hero remember that moment. He warmed up everything for himself, and then sat down on the table for food and started with soup. And then he thought that it was really delicious, and when was the last time he ate homemade food? It all makes him remember fond memories, and then he just thanks for it all. The next morning, our hero wakes up in his room from the alarm clock on which it was 10 minutes to 8 in the morning. Cashin gradually opens his eyes and something bothers him. Then he went to the bathroom to clean himself up, where brushing his teeth he thought it wasn't him. He just has to live someone else's life. He thought he would feel better after a good sleep, but no. And if he had the opportunity, he would like to go back to the past. After that, the spirit appears and wishes good morning, but our hero answers him that it is not kind. Then he is already putting on his shoes and is about to go to school, and then someone asks him if he is going to school. It was his sister who said, even if he said goodbye to him, and her name was Kwan Yuri, she was a beautiful girl who had just woken up. Cashin, on the other hand, felt strange to finally meet her, and wondered if he could tell her the truth. Suddenly she remembers something and takes a bank card out of her pajama pocket, and gives it to our hero. He tells him to put his pocket money in there and use it wisely, but the guy didn't understand why she was giving him the card. When he picked it up, he remembered how Kwon Kanu had asked her if she could give him money for the next month. But his sister did not understand this request, since he had only given him pocket money last week. The guy didn't know what to answer her, because he couldn't tell how he was attracted to the bullies at school who asked him to borrow money, only $100, and then he just told her that he had lost his wallet. She understood everything then and agreed to give him money and asked him not to worry, then he thanks her for it. But she did not finish, she would put them on a bank card. The boy did not understand that then. After that, Cashin realizes what is happening here by looking at the map, then he says goodbye to her, and is about to leave thanking her for the map and asks her to be careful. Just as she is about to wish him a good day, she suddenly notices and asks him to wait. She notices how he has changed and then it comes to her. His hair looks different, and then she says with a joyful voice, the hairstyle turns out to change people so much. And she's been telling him to cut his hair for a long time, but he replies that he just put it in a different way. Then he leaves and his sister screams after him, asking if he has a girlfriend? He doesn't respond to this, and just says he's going to school. After a while, they show us one of the schools in Korea where Cashin studied. It was noisy and there were a lot of students. Further in the class, 3 shooting galleries looked at everyone somewhere, and could not understand anything. They were looking at one of the hooligans who was looking at something on his phone, and he was strained by these looks. Suddenly, with furious eyes, he looks at his classmates, who abruptly turned away from him, and then he couldn't stand it, and yelled at the whole class, which they all stared at him, and ordered them to quickly turn away. The blonde guy was angry and realized that all this was because of our hero. Suddenly someone took him by the shoulder, and he angrily asked what he needed. But someone turned out to be Cashin, and the bully was seriously scared. The guy asked him if he knew where his desk was. Asking this, he looked at him with a terrible look, which made the bully afraid. Then he just lowers his head to the bottom and obediently points to the place of our hero. When the guy left, the bully was trembling very much with fear. Our hero sat down at his place and Moro says, looking at the bully, "Why is he staring at us like that, directly burning with his gaze?" The bully was scared and furious at the same time that he had lost to the guy earlier. Suddenly the spirit and Cashin heard a conversation about villains near the school. The student said that while he was working part-time, he watched a live broadcast. There was a huge fight between 2 villains. Other students were shocked by this. Moros understands and says that they are talking about our hero, but he pays zero attention to it. Then they discuss that the world is so weird, since recently there was a case about a serial killer, with an injured schoolgirl. Many saw this news, as the villain cut off her limbs and drank all the blood. Some are sure that a psychopath did it for sure. Some said that the driver was a murderer, and many were surprised at this, because he is the head of the Vilzone in the Kadam district. Then Cassiano wondered if there was a Vilzone in that district. The fact is that Vilzona is an autonomous district of villains. Then someone told another rumor about the driver and how he conducts experiments on humans, and schoolchildren are completely disgusted by this. For all of them, this is a great horror, and they hope all the villains will die a painful death. Meanwhile, we are taken to the street where some bully was laughing very hard with a cigarette in his hands. Next to him stood the leader of that gang of school bullies, whom Cashin had laid earlier on the roof. He tells Kwok Taegu to control himself, but the latter calms him down and asks him to give him a little laugh. But this infuriates the student and asks him to close his mouth. The same agrees so that the guy does not freak out. Then he puts out his cigarette and asks what should he do with that guy. The head gives him an envelope with money and tells him not to worry, and they did not deprive him, while the bespectacled man stood behind him and looked attentively. Kwok was delighted to see the envelope, and while they were rejoicing, bespectacled man thought it seemed that Kwok Taegu was close to Kihun, but he would not want to be near this type. Then Kwok puts his hand on the head of the gang and says how good it is to have friends, and you can always rely on someone, after which he asks what should he break to that guy or even kill him. A little later at school, our hero was heading somewhere along the corridor, and suddenly someone called him and asked him to wait. It was Kim Yukin, who said that he did not know Cashin's name, but decided to find out how his wound was, and then our hero shows him the patch and answers, as you can see. Moros watched this and remembered how Cashin had put on a band-aid in the toilet before. The spirit asked him, he has self-healing, so why does he need this band-aid? The guy replied, they would meet that kid Kim anyway. Suddenly suspects something, and then the spirit realizes that the guy is not as stupid as he seems. Cashin asks Kim why he called him to pay for the band-aid. Kim notices how they are being watched and responds to our hero, maybe to repay with something else instead of money. Cashin smiled and turned to leave, saying at the same time that he didn't think about it. Kim decides to ask him before he leaves, what is his name? Then Cashin answers him with his current name, Quan Kong, and leaves, while Kim thinks about pronouncing his name. Leaving school, the guy thinks how uncomfortable it was for him about the intern, and then Moros asks if he is thinking about Kim, and since he does not answer, then he is still right. Next, our hero thinks his name is Kim Yukin, owns fire, quite attractive, tall, the dream of all schoolgirls. Excellent academic performance, exemplary behavior, a promising psyker who cannot close his eyes to justice. That's what Cashin can say about him from all the information he has dug up. But then Morse realizes that the guy is really good and decides to ask, is he jealous? Cashin answers, his dream is to become like Cashin Lee, a top psyker with the same power, and the spirit asks, is he Kim's idol? Our hero replies, since he is so good, he should have been sent to a special school for training psychers and does not understand what he is doing in an ordinary school. Moros listen to him in silence, and abruptly notices that they are being watched at the very end of the street behind the fence, and then wonders why those two are looking at them like that. These were the same bullies from school who had been following him and reporting to the ringleader over the phone. They were asked what was going on there, and then the blonde-haired bully said everything was going well and they continued surveillance, and said they would call back later. Meanwhile, the leader stood with Kwok Taegu and his friend and told them how everything was going according to plan. At least this fool was good for something. Kwok throws away a cigarette and says that it's time for them to move forward to punish our hero. After a while, the hooligans continued to follow him and reached the alley that leads to the villas. Suddenly someone turned to them. This almost made the guy shit his pants, and then the croaker jokes with him that he knows such terrible words, but he replies out of fright that he did not mean it. Their boss asks where their target is and then he points to the alley. But he wasn't there, which is what the elders are talking about. But he must be there, he was there just a second ago, and then the bespectacled man assumes how he turned into that alley. The hooligans do not hesitate to decide to run in that direction, but I tried to stop them, because Wilson is there, and this puzzled him very much. They came running to the area where the villains live and they are walking down the street, but they can't find our hero in any way. Kwok asks, since there is no further road, but they have not found this guy, so where is he? And then the bespectacled man was asked if they had turned there at all, to which he replied positively. But the Kwok comes up to him and hits him on the leg in parallel, asking if they decided to play games with him. The bespectacled man falls to his knees from the blow, and the croaker tells him they just had to follow him and asks why he is silent. The bespectacled man was trembling in pain and could not answer anything. But suddenly they all noticed Cashin, who was standing behind them, and said, it seems that he found them. At that moment, they were being watched by a camera that was aimed at Cashin, and already on the other side it was clear that someone was looking at our hero. It was a room full of computers that had a lot of information and video from cameras in different areas. The man sitting on the chair in front of the monitors was twirling a screwdriver in his hand, and it was the boss of the Vilzone himself, named Driver, who drew attention to that group and said that they had guests. Meanwhile, our hero was watching the hooligans, and then Kwok turns to his friends saying that they just look at this guy. He wasn't even surprised that they were here. Did he really lose his fear? And is he the one who got on Ki-hun? But our hero does not answer them and just keeps silent and looks at the Kwok. Then he laughs and gives Cashin 3 seconds, saying that he can run while there is a chance. Then he makes a report in 3 seconds. But Cashin did not move from his place and continued to look at them. This also surprised the hooligans of the schoolchildren, and the Kwok himself was angry. He approaches him and says that the guy is really asking for a fight, at which point Cashin asks, he doesn't know how to fight, right? Kwak did not understand the question, and immediately at this moment 2 fingers of Cashin fly into his eyes and he hits him in the eyes, from which he begins to scream in pain. Then the guy grabs him by the hair and hits him right into the wall. As a result, Kwak falls unconscious. This shocked the bullies from school, looking at the Kwok, who lay and did not move, and our hero asked the bully, calling him a talker, Why is he being framed? Quack's friend got angry and ran to attack Cashin, shouting, but he can't grab the guy in any way, as he dodges all his attacks. As a result of the last attack, Cashin finds himself behind the bully and hits him on the leg. He fell down with his eyes closed, and when he opened them, he sees a leg in front of his face. Cashin says how he gave them a chance to come to their senses, but they're jerks, they're asking for it. After that, he hit him in the face, and he hysterically began to scream in pain. Then he looks at the 3 school bullies and asks if they will already run away. Meanwhile, the Quack got up and spoke like a goat, our hero, and hardly gets up, saying that he is a corpse. This surprised everyone, and our hero thought maybe he overdid it. Then Quack stands up, and it turns out that he is the 2nd place in the national Thai boxing competitions. The leader of the school hooligans was happy about this, since Quack is now serious because he got angry, and then Cassin is definitely finished. Everyone was surprised by the croak, but our hero stood and looked at him. Then we are transferred to the gym in our hero's previous life, where everyone trained and went about their business, while someone fought in the ring. It was a C-rank psyker named John Klaus. His class was a stiker, and the skill was strength, and he was hitting someone. They shouted at him to keep John quiet and not kill the newcomer, laughing at the same time. Someone comes up to them and asks what they are doing. It was Jack, who had just come to the gym, and he was late for something. He reminds them how he asked them what they were doing, and then they answer him. They don't see what, they watch sparring and laugh. Jack noticed something while John was hitting the rookie with all his might. He was also standing in the block. John asks why without protection and is told that the newcomer told him he didn't need it and laughed. But Jack wasn't referring to the newcomer, but to John, and that surprised everyone, because no one understood what he meant. Then Jack replies that this newcomer Cashin Lee is a graduate of the ABPP, or the Psyker Combat Training Agency, the youngest in the entire history of the agency. And then people remember that this is the youngest graduate, and Jack adds, he is a master of hand-to-hand combat, and has never lost a one-on-one battle. This shocked people who did not believe in it, because they thought that his power was just on fire, and wasn't he from the enlightened class. At that moment, they all turned their attention to the ring, where our hero Cashin started hitting John and he fell. At this moment, we were abruptly transferred to the present, where the Quack also falls unconscious and our hero stood in front of him. Everyone was surprised and scared by what they saw, but the Quack came to himself and expectorates blood. Abruptly, Cashin grabs his face and begins to press, and he felt a terrifying energy, and meanwhile our hero thought, what stupid schoolchildren. They only know how to attack schoolchildren, since they themselves do not yet know how terrible the world can be. And if they had come across such a strong opponent like him earlier, they would hardly have formed this squad of morons. And then he remembers all those who killed him, and if he had been much stronger than he, Jeff, and Kanu, they would have been able to avoid such a fate, which eventually happened to them, so he needs to become so powerful to destroy the Lampas. The bully students were shocked and scared that they even trembled, and then one of them said that they needed to get out, and then they started screaming when they saw the villain Driver above them, who was watching them. He was a B-rank villain named Driver. His engineer class and skill were light. He stood on a large screwdriver and watched the fight of this gang. He stood calmly on it, and looked at them until they were very scared when they realized that they were facing a villain, and then they all ran away in horror as fast as possible, and the croaker also ran after them.